Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Appreciate it. AJ just mentioned that if you're not speaking, if you could put your microphone on mute, we'd appreciate it. The agenda calls for us to go through do kind of an introduction. I don't know on this format if that's necessary with everyone's name sitting right by their tile, but I would like to welcome everybody here this morning. We mentioned, AJ was mentioned earlier, there were a couple of board members that had some issues come up that weren't able to attend. So I think Paula and was it Joshua or Joel who couldn't make it due to some unforeseen circumstance that came up this morning. But other than that, I believe everybody's here. On the staff front, Rachel Tucker, Joel Heberling, John Kerr, and Oryx Batiste are here. Thank you to them for showing up this morning. I believe everyone from NNE is here and ACC as well. So thank you all. With respect to the non-staff or board members, we have Andrew Rutherford, who will be presenting on behalf of HUB. Richard Davis is not here yet, but he will be here acting as our attorney, presenting the legal portion of the presentation. And Ann McCartney, who is our parliamentarian, is here as well. So thank you everybody for being here and showing up. Oryx is going to now share a screen, and we're going to go through the slides. These slides will relate, I think, exactly as to your binders. So if you want to follow along in your binders. Everyone getting that screen share? Oh, got a thumbs up from Kim. Okay, great.
I wasn't quite as ready as I thought. There we go.
Okay, here we go. So I know in years past, I watched last year's video and I noticed that Joe kind of read through this verbatim. Since everybody has this, I am not going to read through all these materials verbatim, but certainly it's very important information. Obviously the accountability of the GM reports to the board and is the key link from the board to staff. The board of directors instructs the GM through official action, and from time to time may change its the limitation policies, shifting the boundaries. Next one works. So Sudden Valley is not an island. We have, whoops, you got the next one?
Yeah.
It's a good thing Oryx is here helping me, otherwise I'd be dead in the water.
I'm not sure why it's choosing now to freeze.
But we're having a little trouble getting to the next slide, but that's okay. Everyone has their binder, so I'm gonna move on to the next slide, talking about Sudden Valley and its relationships throughout the community. Obviously, we have several external relationships. The sheriff department, chief amongst them, DNR, the school districts. We work closely, staff works closely with and board members work closely with outside agencies. With regards to our internal relationships, obviously the biggest one is with the members and tenants, so all of the residents of Sudden Valley and the non-resident owners as well. Other key relationships are with the county library, El Agave, all the different condominium associations. And then the board of directors and their committees. Each committee has a board member. The committees are the ACC, communications, document review, emergency preparedness, finance, and then long range planning, which has several subcommittees. The NNE committee and Parks, Trails, and Rec committee. Okay, are you able to go to the next one, or are you still stuck?
Still
Okay.
Sorry.
Is everybody okay with just following line in their binders if we can't get the slides going? Okay. So for this next one, the challenges and opportunities and I should have kind of led in with appreciating everyone's grace and understanding as I perform this role of interim GM, which is will likely be for a short while, for a very short while, but everyone's been very helpful and I appreciate that. I didn't know how appropriate it was for me in this role to necessarily define our challenges and opportunities, but I did come up with a couple, but these may well shift as the next interim general manager comes in, and then after that as the permanent GM arrives. But I think clearly one of our biggest challenges will be to address our staffing issues. We obviously are in the middle of a fairly significant transition right now, but it sounds like we are close to having an interim general manager on board. The idea is that he or she will be here for 3 to 4 months and help in the transition to a new permanent general manager, as well as exploring the options of a management company. Obviously, the pandemic has created several challenges, some of which we're experiencing right now, as we are all probably in our 1 millionth Zoom meeting. But there's obviously beyond that, there's a potential impact on dues collection. Certainly, it's had a negative effect on our amenities and events, and having the Canadian border remaining closed creates a challenge for our Canadian owners and customers. On the opportunity side, the transition that we're going through right now does present a really important opportunity for Sudden Valley to establish very competent leadership, and the hope and expectation is that the new GM will build a really positive working relationship with the board of directors and the staff. So there's a great opportunity there. I think we're all hopeful that the vaccination program will bring an end to the pandemic. I think we are seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. I certainly am, and I may be overly optimistic on that, but I'm hoping that sooner than later we will see things begin to get back to normal with respect to the pandemic. Two big keys that we'll see there is the rec program coming back, getting our recreation and amenities back open on a regular and fully operational basis. And then again, hoping that the border reopens at some point so our Canadian owners and customers are able to return. One thing I can speak to is that the golf course is on a really positive growth trend, has been for the last few years. This year was no difference there. We still experienced really positive growth, and we'll show another profit on the operational side this year. New home construction is has been a very positive aspect of the last couple of years. There were 12 new approvals in 2020 and 34 completions of previously approved projects. So a lot of positivity in terms of growth and new owners coming to the valley. So this was another one where I didn't necessarily have a ton of requests in terms of governance support. The one issue, and AJ and I have talked about this a little bit. AJ and Rachel and I have talked about the issue that I see in my short time here as having acted as the interim GM is I think that one thing that we could really would serve us well to define would be our communication protocols between board of directors and staff, and defining that and simplifying it and making it more efficient. So I'm quite certain, sounds like AJ has already been working on several possible options on that front. So that was the big governance support issue that I saw as being a factor. But again, a new GM will likely have different requests on that front. So with respect to that, that's kind of the portion of my my presentation. And at this point, if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be happy to address them. Okay, hearing none, we will go to the moving on to our organizational structure. Oryx did a really nice job of cleaning up our org chart. We all agreed that the one that was presented in the past was a little bit maybe more confusing than it needed to be, but this is our basic structure. As you can see, the SVCA membership sits at the very top, and the board of directors acting as a conduit between the membership and then to the general manager. The varied departments sit below the general manager. Obviously, accounting, admin services, safety and security, maintenance, and the rec department. The rec department oversees the marina and parks, and you can see that turf care works with rec in helping to coordinate the parks department. And then turf care and golf management together make up the golf enterprise. With respect to admin, the general manager oversees the admin services manager. And then the various departments below the admin services manager. It's quite a big role. We feel lucky to have Rachel having taken that role. She's for being relatively new. She's been doing a wonderful job for us and been very helpful, certainly for me and for all staff during this transition time. Next department, facilities and maintenance, it's Bruce Bishop, who oversees this department. He coordinates the maintenance, the roads crew, capital projects, weather response, and then also the maintenance contracts. HVAC and pest control are a couple of examples. On the accounting side, Joel Heberling leads up this department. Joel's doing a wonderful job for us as well. He takes care of accounts receivable. He oversees staff that takes care of accounts receivable, accounts payable, and the collections and compliance. On the rec side, we're in a period of transition here as well. Maddie Otley, who had been leading this department, left us for another opportunity back in November, late October, early November. We haven't replaced her yet, but we'll hopefully within the next few weeks we'll address that situation as protocols for the pandemic restrictions are starting to change, and we may end up feeling some pressure to get rec open here sooner than later. You can see that the rec manager with respect to parks works very closely with the turf care superintendent, Jacob Close. Jacob schedules, supervises, and trains the parks crew, the two-person parks crew. It works really, that relationship has worked out very well since we established it a couple of years ago with the new rec assessment. And then you can see the service staff below the rec manager, who the rec manager oversees. Hopefully this year we'll get to reopen the pools and hire lifeguards and get back to some normalcy on that front.
Ryan, question.
Yes.
Turf care. Okay, that's I've heard that term. What does that department do? Are they caring for the lawns for golf? That's where my brain goes.
You're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Turf care. The turf care department is the department that takes care of golf course maintenance.
Okay.
The head of the turf care department, Kim, is Jacob Close, and he wears different hats as well. Excuse me. He helps. He obviously helps on the park side. He does a fair bit of work with Bruce on the maintenance and facility side as well.
Okay.
And then when we do have snow events that last for a fair while, his crew, the turf care crew, it's a really good symbiotic relationship in that they will help with snow removal as well. When we have long several day weather events, snow events, it's really nice to be able to move turf care crews over to snow plowing.
And how many folks are in that department?
I'm sorry?
How many folks are in that department?
So we have year round, we have there's 5 year round, and then he has 4 seasonals that come in during the summer months as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. Moving over to safety and security. This is the department that Norm Smith heads up. One of his main functions is overseeing the contract for our security services that's currently with Pacific Security. He helps. He does a wonderful job. Obviously, when we have weather events, any kind of emergency planning, he coordinates quite closely with the agencies that we mentioned earlier in the presentation, with the governmental agencies and the emergency response agencies in the city and county, and make sure that we have a voice with those different organizations. And then also on the compliance side, he works closely with the ACC with respect to ensuring compliance, and if there's issues with violations, that's a large part of what he does as well. Down to the golf department, which I head up as the director. And as you can see here, that the golf, the turf care superintendent, he manages his turf care staff. We just talked about that a little bit briefly. And then below him is a head professional, and then the various golf staff, the assistant, the assistant professional, the golf shop assistant, and then our staff, our seasonal staff below that, that help run the golf operations.
Brian?
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit about what is meant by golf enterprise? It's on your first slide.
I sure can, Nancy. Yeah, so the golf, we just want to make it clear that there are 2 departments that make up the golf enterprise. They're managed by separate people, and they have separate staffs. They have separate budgets, but the golf enterprise is the turf care and the golf management departments combined. So from an expense point of view, we add the expenses of those 2 departments together when we determine the golf expense. The expense to run the golf course is those two departments. So they are in a sense separate entities. The turf care department has their own manager and their own budget, and the golf management department has their own manager and budgets. And those two departments combined are the golf enterprise.
And then you separate out the portion of turf care that belongs to parks somehow.
Yes,
in your
exactly right. Exactly right. So that portion, the portion that the two staff members that Jake, our turf care superintendent, manages, their wages go completely to parks, because they do not do anything on the golf course. They just take care of parks. Those two individuals are dedicated full-time to parks maintenance. And
they use turf care equipment.
They use some turf care equipment. There is some equipment that's dedicated solely to parks, but and that's mostly what they use, but they do from time to time use some turf care equipment as well, but mostly parks dedicated equipment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions on the org charts? Okay. So now we will then, if you can flip your binders over to the next tab, that's the administration tab. And I will hand off to Rachel Tucker.
Good morning, everyone. So most of you might have already met the staff, but we have Lauren Shigley, who you will see mostly at the front desk. She's our member services specialist. She's usually our first point of contact. She coordinates our e-blast notifications. She handles posters. She's really creative, so she makes all of the signage, because if it was left to us, we would not make it look pretty. So she does a great job. And she's also our communications committee liaison. And then we have Oryx Batiste. She's our board of directors support, finance committee support, members services, appeals committee support, admin support to GM, and she assists in complaints. She's kind of our jack of all trades, and we all work with her pretty closely. And both Lauren and Oryx are great and helpful. If you ever have any issues arise, just go ahead and give them a call. And John, he is our IT administrator, and he's the maintenance connections. He handles all of our IT, keeps us running on Zoom, and keeps us connected with the community as far as giving out information. He also oversees our website and posting on Facebook. We really couldn't do what we do without John, so we're happy to have him. And Susie is fairly new to us. She is a temp ACC coordinator. She's filling in for Jenny Torres, who is out for the next few months, and she handles the ACC compliance, member support for ACC requirements, new construction compliance, common area permitting, hazard trees and permitting. She is fairly new to her position, but if you're ever near the office, I welcome you to stop by and say hi. She's super helpful, and we're happy to have her as part of our team. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. That would be Joel. Let me grab him.
Joel, you'll need to unmute. Joel,
Okay.
there you go.
Yeah, I got it now. Just trying to find her name. Okay, hello everyone. We're finally to the best part of the whole presentation right here. So I'm sorry you
I
had
agree,
to,
Joel.
I'm sorry you had to sit through the rest of that just to finally get to this, you know. So I'm just going to cover real quickly the financial statements. Of course, the good thing is most of you now on the board have sat through a couple of board meetings where I talked about financial statements. So you've already had kind of a little experience with it. So I'll just start off with the first slide here. And obviously we're not like any other standard business, but we are incorporated. So we're an incorporated 501c4 nonprofit organization, which we operate for the benefit of the general public. And capital dues, like in our case, capital dues, any amount that you pay in capital dues technically increases the cost basis of your home, so to speak. So when you go to sell the home, whatever you paid in capital dues actually could be considered as increasing your cost basis of the home when you sell it, which would decrease your profit, so to speak. Now I'm turning the next page. So we're looking at, now what we're looking at here is basically the balance sheet, which is usually what I always start off with whenever I present these financial statements. And basically with the balance sheet, what we're getting to is, you'll see like the bottom where I put this box around this net operating assets. That's like the first kind of major section of that balance sheet under the operations part. And basically what this is getting at is is we want to make sure we have positive operating assets in that red box at the end. So if those operating assets flip negative, that means we're eating into things like, for example, prepaid assessments and stuff like that. But that's not a worry at all right now, and that's not the case for us. So that's really good. I don't see that becoming a worry. Now, to the next page. Is Oryx looking us through this? Oh. Okay. So at this next page right here, basically what this is just talking about is just basically the major funds that we have going on. So we have the SURF fund, which is SURF Capital Repair and Replacement Reserve Fund, which basically covers everything besides roads and mailboxes. So that's the easy way to think about it. Whatever isn't roads or mailboxes is SURF. So like a building, a truck, stuff like that, that would all be SURF. And anything that goes into this category too could also be income from the sale of fixed assets. If we sell something, if we went out and sold a truck and we got a gain from it, then we could plug it into here as well. Roads fund is, it's a major repair of, obviously it's all the roads, but it's major repair also of culverts, drains, ditches, retaining walls, swales. Yeah, income from, the stormwater and phosphorus mitigation plan also goes into this fund as well. Board density reduction fund, you probably hear the least about this, but it's just basically property taxes for Sudden Valley property paid out of this. Income from the sale of Sudden Valley property would also go into this category, like the sale of lots, for example. Mailboxes fund, that one is very self-explanatory, just covers those mailboxes that you see over there on that corner going up to the Area Z area. Capital Reserve Holding Fund, this is basically where that 1/4 of the 1% of the home sales goes into this fund is what's going into this. So whenever someone sells a home, then the buyer has to pay 1/4 of 1% of the selling price of that home, and it'll go into this fund. So we can go to the next page here.
Joel, one quick question.
Yeah.
What do we use the money for from the board density reduction fund? Sounds like money's being collected. What is that money used for?
Oh, yeah. So basically we could pay property taxes out of this fund, and any income from the sale of like lots would also go into this bucket as well, is what that's for. Of course, at this point, we really only have one lot available for sale, the Area Y, which is like kind of like, it's almost like the size of about 30 or so lots. So that's basically the only lot now prior years when you saw lot sales going on, then you'd see that money going into this fund right here as well.
So my question wasn't where the income came from, it was where the money goes. What is it used for? So it's the money's going in, but where does it go out to?
So basically right now, the main thing that it would go out to would be property taxes. So like payment of property taxes for Sudden Valley properties.
Oh, I see.
I believe, Kim, it was originally set up to purchase lots to turn into green space.
Yeah.
So they sold
Correct.
the Byron track, which is now Lakewood for WWU.
Right.
And those proceeds, and I don't know all of this for certain, but essentially that money went to purchasing lots to take off of our assessment rolls and the tax rolls with the county and stuff and put them in green space in perpetuity.
Okay.
And then there's still just money left over. I was not aware we could pay pay property taxes with that.
Okay. So it seems like kind of an outdated fund. I mean, if we're not still buying lots for density reduction, it seems, I mean.
Yeah, what
Not to
I
have a
remember from the
discussion.
density reduction was that the community voted for it, and then the board at the time set like a goal of like 1,400 lots or something along those lines.
Wow.
To take off of the rolls, and they met that goal, and since then it's just been kind of sitting idle, I think, to some extent.
Yeah, it basically has. It's sitting at around, like on the October financial statements, around $128,000.
Okay, Joel,
Yeah, Nancy. Yeah.
of these capital funds, can any of them be used as collateral for a loan?
Um,
Advocating that either, just asking.
well, collateral, you mean like tying up, like earmarking a bucket of cash for collateral? Is that what you mean by that?
It's cash, yes. So I want to say I want to borrow some $1 million or something, and I need something to put up. Some people put up bank accounts, some people put up their IRAs, some put up their house. Can Sudden Valley put up a capital account?
I mean, if you wanted to specifically earmark it as, like, for example, if someone went out and took out a loan to buy a car, and then they put up a checking account as collateral and sealed it off, so to speak. You know, I guess ultimately, something like that can be done if the board wanted to. But usually, like when a loan is taken out, then the bank will just kind of look at us, kind of like how they look at any other person in terms of how much we have dues coming in and our net worth and so on and so forth, like that.
Kind of depends on the size of the loan you're after.
Yeah, I mean, the only loan we have, of course, is that SURF loan, and I'll get into that also in the next couple of
Thank
slides.
you.
Yeah.
Hey, Joel.
Oh, yes, Joel.
But before we move on, could you touch a little bit further on the mailbox fund?
Yeah, the mailbox, like, for example, we don't have, basically, we're just accumulating cash in the mailbox fund for potential capital expenditures on there. Mailbox fund is another one that's just, basically this fund has just been going up. We're just accumulating it from year to year, just building up for our planned expenditures in the future for the mailboxes. And of course, mailboxes is one of those elements in the actual dues itself.
And that's sorry if these are really stupid questions, but that's the mailboxes, the grounds surrounding them. If there was a project to install lights in that area, all of that would be included, or that would be paid for from that, or not?
Yeah, meaning like if they actually put lighting around the mailboxes and stuff like that. I mean, that I guess could also be up to like the purview of the board, whether or not they wanted to do that from mailbox or like a SURF type expenditure as well for that.
Yeah, because I've heard people complaining about that for over a year, and I've heard people talking about plans to put lights in for over a year. So I'm not sure what's holding that up if we have the money there to do it.
And like at the end of October for mailboxes, we had approximately, around 40, we'll say around 47,000 sitting there like in cash for a mailbox at the end of October.
Cool.
Well,
Thank you.
I was going to say something. I just would like to add to the mailbox fund. I don't know if without the board approving it, you could use it for anything other than package boxes or the actual different clusters. That's what the original mailbox fund was for. And we actually had a special assessment for that. And it was only to install the different clusters around the valley.
Yeah.
And the package boxes that are there with them. I'm sure the board could amend that, what that original request was for, but I would hope that the board would do that. Every now and then these boxes, there was one over in gate 13, they had to replace the post and everything for the box, and they're really expensive. Every now and then somebody runs into them, and you're looking at thousands of dollars to replace a section of those. So we just need to be careful with that money, that's all. But that's, the original mailbox fund, and I don't think it's been changed, was only for the clusters and the package boxes.
Yeah. That's why I like when I heard the like purchase of lighting and stuff, that one, like you said, Linda, whether or not that could actually fall into the jurisdiction, so to speak, of the mailbox fund.
Yep.
guess we can just go to the next slide, where we'll talk about capitalization policy. So basically, how this capitalization policy goes, so how our policy is right now is the board has to approve all capital expenditures, and it will have to be for something that has a useful life in excess of a year and a cost of 2,500 or more, basically. So as long as something has a 1 year or greater useful life or cost at least $2,500 or more, then it will fall under a capitalization policy. The board could approve it. And then basically what that means is it can become a fixed asset at that point. That's what that means. So it doesn't get expensed through operations. It shows up on our balance sheet as a fixed asset when it's all said and done with. We can go to the next slide for the only loan we have right now, which is the SURF loan. In fact, okay. So basically, the original loan of this, the original loan term when it was amended became like a potential borrowing at 1.625 million for the loan. Now I know, gosh, I guess I didn't bring that sheet up because I looked up how much was the actual balance itself right now, and it was approximately around 1.24 million, like right in that ballpark. It's 1.2 something, 1.2 million, 24, 26, somewhere around there. When I just looked it up shortly before I came upstairs here. And that's including, because the board approved for the approximately $105,000 pay down of that loan from operating surplus in 2019. That's been done last month in December after the board approved that. So that's taking that into account. That's also what's driven that balance down as well, that $105,000 payout of that, little 105,000 and change. And it's a 10-year loan, and it was used for the completion of the capital projects. I just stated the capital projects again in the bullet points at the end of the slide: the adult pool and main pool, resurfacing decks, marina drive, the standpipe and those gangways, the soft armoring at the marina as well, and the Areas East storage sprung structure is what that loan was used for those capital projects. The loan terms too, I've mentioned this in other board meetings, but it's 4.62%, the interest rate too, if anyone was interested in that as well. Going to the next slide.
Is there any opportunity to look at a refinance of that might be advantageous? Like getting a lower rate?
I mean,
possible?
I guess theoretically that would be possible for that. The loan also, like in loan terms, talks about where it could be re-amortized. I mean, that's not something that would really be advantageous for us to do that. Basically, it's just kind of like, it's looking at how much we have of the loan left and then the loan terms, then restating and kind of like refiguring what our payment would be. But it's more advantageous for us just to keep like the terms as it is, unless you actually went out and sought out like a new loan is in the future to like drop down the actual rate to essentially replace it, so to speak.
Question, and maybe this could be for the overall board on this. So in our long range planning and capital reserves, had we as a community prepared with a plan to put aside money, then in effect, we would not have had to take out a capital construction loan. Is that a correct understanding?
Was that question to me or to the board?
Or you or anybody? I'm just trying to wrap my mind around this loan. Like, I know that we have a plan for reserves, and if we plan for our finances for the future and we collect adequate dues, would that have been a plan that would have prevented us from taking out this capital construction loan? And anybody can answer it. It's just, I'm trying to wrap my mind around long range planning and taking out loans and things like that.
The loan was taken out. So in 2017, the board put forth the revitalization vote in July, I believe, and that the community rejected that proposal. And then it was kind of shortly after that, the board decided to move forward with a chunk of those projects, which included the marina standpipe fire suppression, the soft shore armoring on the marina, the Quonset hut sprung structure in area Z, and the rebuild of both of the pools. And they took out the loan to do that. I don't know if that fully answers your
No,
question
what it says,
on,
what you just said is like
whether
the
we had
community said
proper
no.
long-range planning and stuff is, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not trying to assign blame or anything. I'm just asking the honest question, like had long-range planning been adequately done and money set aside for future projects, we would have been in a position now where we didn't take out the loan.
I think you'll get a lot of varied opinions on whether proper long-range planning was done or not, and
Yeah,
where
it's not my
where money was
commentary to
chose to
try
be
to,
spent and where it wasn't and stuff like that. I
okay.
don't
All
think you're gonna get a very definitive answer. We could probably go into a big rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I'm not
On
trying to
that
do that.
question.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I think what it does allude to is the fact that we took out this loan, to me says we do need at least better long-range planning than
Yeah.
what we were currently doing.
Yeah, that's my understanding, because if you do have long-range planning, you're not having to borrow later. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. I'm just trying to understand how
And-
these pieces all fit together.
There'll be there'd be discussion on whether the dues were adequate to fund all the needs and that type of thing as well too. So
Yeah.
it's a multitude of reasons,
Sure,
I think.
thank you.
Oh, Steve?
One thing that I don't see on the last slide, when did the loan get taken out and when is it supposed to be paid off?
So the loan was taken out in 2018. And so I believe like the loan is slated to be paid off in approximately 2028.
Thank you.
AJ, AJ, can I add something here to Kim's question that I
Sure.
think is important for us all to know? Originally, when these projects were approved and before we took out the loan, they thought that they would be able to make the loan payments just from our SURF to cover this. And actually, all of these projects that are here are in excess of that $1.6 million. And we actually used some of our SURF money. I want to say it's less than 700,000, and I'd really have to look at what we finished up with. But we're talking around $680,000 of our SURF money to pay for these projects in addition to the loan. Just so you know that.
Yeah, it was like 2.2-ish altogether, I think.
Yeah.
Roughly. Joel probably has better access to what that, we don't need to get into that right
Yeah.
now.
I just wanted everybody to understand that when we took this loan out, that part of it was, we're going to be able to, when we took the loan out, that we felt that over this 10-year period of time, we would have sufficient funds in the SURF reserve to pay for the loan over time, plus do any projects that would come due during that period of time
Okay,
that are on the reserve study.
okay.
Okay.
And I think the loan was largely taken. I don't think there was enough money in the reserve fund to do all of that work. So that was, I think part of the logic behind the loan.
Joel?
I think this question is relevant to this slide. I just was hoping to clarify something, if it is. So looks like we're trying to, at the most, cover the 40 miles, two sides to the road, or 40 to 50. So really 80 to 100 miles of culverts or whatever, ditches, maintenance every at most 5 years. How is that work prioritized? Is that a squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing? And depending on who calls in and reports it, that work gets done? Or is there an official survey that's done on all of our roads to see where the highest priority is? The reason that I ask is I've heard from a couple people that it seems like there's an appearance to some people that the ditches and the culverts in front of board member property get dealt with first. And if somebody comes to fix stuff on my property, I would love to be able to show that I had nothing to do with that happening. So just wondering how that's prioritized.
Probably a Bruce question.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Bruce.
We-
Oh, go ahead.
I can work with Brian and Rachel to get with Bruce and just kind of show what sort of, we should have, we're enough years into this that we should have some sort of like program, ongoing program of like, here's where we worked, here's where we're working towards, and here's what's, coming up in the future even further.
Joel, I believe,
So-
I'm quite certain there is a plan that gets developed every year. Although I haven't had direct knowledge,
Go away.
just through my
It's like a
staff meetings.
orientation thing. like
Steffi,
a-
you're off mute.
Seffi.
Sorry, I was explaining because everyone's like, "What are you doing?" I am so sorry.
So yeah, Joel, there is I mean, I don't have direct knowledge of it, but there is a road plan that that gets developed and that Bruce operates under every year, especially with when it moves over to the veg control as well. Veg control and roads, there is a plan that's set out, and to the best of my knowledge, it doesn't have anything to do with board members.
Right.
But we can certainly get more information from you on that. I don't have direct information for you today, but we can get with Bruce and certainly get you more information on the plan.
That's cool. Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah.
Joel, I'm gonna put 5 cents worth in here. Actually, Bruce should be bringing forward, and usually it's through the general manager, the project every year and for CVC and how much they intend to spend on it. And if I'm not mistaken, there's usually a map of Sudden Valley that shows, here's what we did, here's what we're planning on doing this year. I'll try and see if I can find that from early 2020 and just send you a sample of it, and then you'll know what it looks like.
Yeah, the veg control map definitely exists. I'd have to dig through to find it, but there's definitely a plan for veg control and a map that shows what's been done, what's planning to be done. And Bruce reports on that weekly in terms of what progress they've made every week.
And I can tell you, Bruce is already in the works right now, planning the 2021 CVC, because he's already reached out to me to ask me how much is on the docket in terms of spending wise and he can work with for 2021.
That's great. Yeah, it would be really cool to know just what the total cost, if everything were to be maintained, would cost, and what the cost per mile, and just have some of those or cost per whatever, I don't know, per foot, however it's measured. It would be good to know that and then divide that by 3 to 5 years, however quickly things degrade and all that good nerdy stuff.
Yeah.
Cool.
I know for 2021, of course, I'm doing this from memory, but just remembering what I told Bruce because I just talked to him about this, I think it was even earlier this week, telling him that like currently on the plan for the expenditure wise, it was around like the $111,000 range for 2021. That was in the potential capital planning for that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and actually this slide, of course, this just sums up this whole area that we've been talking about in terms of that, something like this, instead of being an operating expense, is is legitimately can become a capital expense, unlike mowing the grass, like the turf and stuff like that, which is all operating type expenditures. This is, if it's something that is a significant expense and a component to support the road structure, you know, they don't work in the same area. Approximately, looks like they're planted about every 3 to 5 years, not occurring to work in the same area, and it's essential for the extending of the life of the roads. And in the past, in 2015, we reached out to Larson Cross, the auditors, and they looked into this and produced a memo for us. Basically, the bottom line, and I believe that's at the back of your book, but the bottom line is the memo just says, yes, it can become a capital expenditure if you follow kind of those bullet points, like in a nutshell. So instead of coming out of operations, then the board votes on it like they do every single or any other capital expenditure, and then it becomes capitalized as part of the roads. So actually on the balance sheet itself, part of that amount is for the roads is CVC work, the annual CVC work, and it gets depreciated over time. And that was Measure 1 in 2016 that funds that work annually, that pays for that as well. That's a component of the roads dues in your in the dues structure. See, I guess we can go to the next slide. So basically, we've covered like the main funds of capital. And so for operating, there's, you know, the two really main funds outside of just regular operations would be I'll just start with the easy one, the emergency operating fund. And that's just a bucket of cash that's just sitting there. We also have a CD from the payroll processor that we have set up that has been kind of labeled, or that is paid for with that fund. When I say paid for, meaning the cash is ours. So it's that cash isn't going away. The cash is ours and still will always be ours. And then the other fund is the UDR. Of course, this one is probably causes the most confusion, understandably so, when you just hear about it, undesignated reserve fund. And basically all this is collections from the prior year and only operating collections. So like, for example, if someone doesn't pay their dues in 2020 and then they repent and then paid in 2021, then that amount then falls into the UDR category. And then this is up to the board, you know, to decide if they want to take money basically and allocate it in UDR to be used in operations. Back in 2019, approximately $91,000 or so was used for weather-related type expenditures in 2019. Of course, that was a board decision to do that. In 2020, the board has made no decisions to use any UDR money on any sort of operations. So 2019 was the last time any decision was made to take money from, or to designate that money from UDR can be spent on operations.
So Joel, question. So UDR it's written off right away, right? So then that's why it goes into a bucket where it can be used for discretionary items in the future. Is that correct?
Well, basically in terms of like dues being written off, how we do it, like the way that we internally do it. So when you see these financial statements that I put out, anything that's literally over 30 days old, we just write it off immediately, bad debt expense. So when you see these internal financial statements, the goal is we're trying to keep this as close to cash as we can, which is a nice conservative way to show it. And then at the end of the year for the financial audit, what I actually do is in a sense, unwrite off a portion of that. So for it to conform with GAAP, anything that's like 90 days and over, that is bad debt expense. Then anything below that, I unwrite it off, so to speak, just temporarily for the financial statements. And then that reverses in January. So for the UDR, basically if anyone does not pay like their dues in the current year, if they pay it from any past year, then it'll be swept into UDR when we receive that money.
And then it's used for, looks like, just things that the board decides that it's used for.
Yeah, what the board designates it to be used for.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Or like, for example, if we pay like attorney fees and stuff like that relating to collections, relating to like past due accounts, then we'll write it out of UDR as well. Meaning the check will come from the UDR account.
We've done a lot of like snow removal costs and stuff over the years out of that. I can send you the capital reports, Kim, that show the various charges. There's usually only a few charges a year to UDR from what I've seen.
Yeah, you don't have to send them to me. I'll take your word. Thank you.
Now, if we go to the next slide. Okay, so this is talking about the 2019 financial audit. So when I wrote the slide and submitted them, the 2019 financial audit was still in process. But the financial audit is done. So it's totally done. It's totally been issued. The report's been stamped officially. December 29th was the actual date. And that should be in the back of all your books too, as well. So like the actual issued financial audit statements will be right in the back of your binders. And so we received what's qualified, this is audit speak now. An unqualified opinion means clean. That's what you want to get. That's a clean opinion on the financial statements. There were no significant deficiencies that were communicated to us through any written management letters. So we got a nice, good, clean audit for the 2019 year end. It looks like, like the slide said, this is a carryover from prior years, that back in 2014 to 2018, you had a lot more, like in 27 significant control deficiencies in 2014, that's what you don't want. In 2018, it looks like we had a couple that were communicated to us on the management letter. And then for the 2019 audit, we have no significant deficiencies communicated to us.
Congratulations for that, but I don't see it in the back of the manual. I see the elections results and.
Oh, you don't see the financial statements?
Does anybody else know where that is or seen it? Because I only see in the
After
back.
legal, Kim.
After legal?
Or, oh, sorry, after.
There's a whole section called audit.
That's not accurate, sorry. After
Okay.
committees.
Audit. Okay, I'll look for, thank you.
If you don't see them in the back at all for that?
No, it has its own section called audit that Linda just pointed out. So it's there. It's in its own section.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And the auditor is now, so he's slated to show up Zoom wise, obviously, to the 20, I believe it's the January 28th board meeting, the last Thursday of the month. And then he'll give his presentation there for the audited financial statements. If we go to the next page, we only have 2 more pages to go. So the next page, so this just talks about the reserve study. We had a level 2 reserve study that we did for the past year, and that was issued September 2020. The year before that was a level 3 reserve study, which means just no on-site inspection, just a reserve study update. So last year's reserve study was the level 2 on-site visual inspection reserve study. And in terms of the reserve, so just basically to boil it down, these questions, the reserve study is supposed to, basically what it's getting to, how funded are we? Just replacement schedule of assets and the maintenance. But just to boil it down in terms of probably the people's question, what someone's question would be, well, how funded were we, on the reserve studies? So the reserve studies as of the January 1, 2020 date, which is what they're talking about for the funding levels at that point. So for SURF, we were 9%. Now this means, maybe I'll just quickly go over when you hear the terms fully funded versus baseline funded, like those terms get floated around. So in case anyone's just for the heck of it, in case anyone's interested, but I'll start off with the baseline funded first. So basically what the baseline funded means is I'll just use, we'll say you're going to replace a roof, that costs $100,000. And so basically in 10 years from now is when you're going to replace the roof. So basically in that year that it's going to be replaced, do you have the money in there in year 10 to be able to replace this thing? That's basically the baseline funded. That's what you're looking at from a baseline funded basis. So in any year that you're looking at, will you have the cash in that year to actually replace that item? Now, a fully funded kind of approach is more conservative. So what that, and that's probably the most pertinent kind of piece of information, really what you want to know in terms of when you hear that term fully funded, what that means is, let's just say you're in year 0 and the only thing you have is this roof and that's it. And it's $100,000. Well, then if you need to replace it in 10 years, then from a fully funded basis, we'll say, okay, in year 1, you should have 10,000 of that set aside. And then in year 2, you should have 20,000 in your fund. Year 3, now you should have 30,000. If you stuck to that schedule, then in year 1, if you had 10,000, you're fully funded at that point. And then in year 2, you had 20,000, you're completely funded at that point. So that's basically how that works. So like in year 1, if you looked at your balance and how much money do you have? Oh, you have 5,000 in your account. Well, okay, fully funded, you should have 10,000. Well, you're 50% fully funded according to the fully funded kind of modeling. And that's how the fully funded modeling works. So with these percentages, SURF, January 1, 2020, we were 9% fully funded. Roads, we were 19%. Mailbox, we were 20%. So out of all those funds, a blended rate of 12% fully funded. You could think about it like that, 12%.
Joel, I have
Yes.
a question about that quick. Does the money sitting aside in the capital reserve holding fund or the board density reduction fund get factored into our percent funded at all?
No, they don't. That's not factored into that amount.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Joel, about funding.
Uh-huh.
So I know when we looked at when we did the booklet for the budget, you just took this amount of money and left us only with the 600,000 carryover. That's the requirement.
Yeah.
But there's really going to be more money left in there.
Right.
And when we look at how well funded we are for 2021, don't we have to add in the carryover of unused money from
Oh, yeah.
SURF that we haven't used this year?
Yeah. So like when we looked at the funding for 2021, then we'll look, like, for example, the assets that I'm going to close out for the end of 2020 will then become a part of that reserve study. And then however much money we have basically in roads and SURF and stuff like that, then that amount will then become a part of basically a part of that ratio of how much money do we actually have in the accounts versus how much, according to the funding model, we need to have to be fully funded, which will then drive like a new set of percentages.
Okay, that's what I was just wondering, because I thought when we looked at some of the stuff earlier, I had talked to the prior treasurer and we had an amount in there that really wasn't that carryover. And I just wanted to make sure we're going to carry over any of that unused money that we funded in 2020 into applying it, being able to apply it besides our assessments in 2021. That amount will carry over and give us probably a better percent funded.
Yeah, because
Okay.
basically all that carryover is kind of like a board safety amount. And this is how much money we should have set aside, so to speak. Like kind of like a check. Yeah.
We'll have the 600,000, of course, but I think there's like, I don't know, I'd have to go look where we are, but it's like there's usually at least another 100,000, you know, there's more in there that's can be used for funding in 2021 or even future years, because we never usually even spend down to the $600,000 limit.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
like, yeah. Because for these ratios, then it basically comes down to, well, how much cash do we have? You know, instead of like, who really cares about the carryover? How much cash do we have like in the accounts to work with at that point? Because the carryover, like that $600,000 carryover, well, that's the amount that can be used, you know, to work on capital. So if it came down to it for capital expenditures. I guess we can go to the next slide. Yeah, I mean, because these slides, when these slides were put in here, I'll talk about, because I have more up-to-date collection rates. I'll just talk about these. Talked about these at the last board meeting, but I'll just go over them again. In terms of like, the only thing when it's talking about the UDR portion of it is basically just to put that in a nutshell, the higher a collection rate, then the more we'll be sweeping into UDR. Like, but in a sense, that's kind of a good thing. That means if we have less money to potentially sweep into UDR, then that means that's because more people are paying more in each individual year, which means we got the money sooner than later, which is what we would want, actually. But with the collection rates at the end, so at the end of November, the most up-to-date collection rates at this point was month-to-date 98.1%, month-to-date, year-to-date 94.9%. That we'll compare that to last year at the end of November 2019, collection rate month-to-date was 97.6. But I mean, especially at the end of November, year-to-date is the most important at this point. Collection date at the end of 2019 November, 97.2%. So we are under, which we would probably expect to see given what's going on, with the pandemic and everything, shutdowns and all of that stuff affecting people's employment and businesses. So 97.2% at the end of November 2019, the end of November 2020, 94.9%. So that's where we stand collection rate wise. Payment plans, yeah, we're still hovering probably around 25 payment plans at this point in time. In terms of late fees and interest, as probably many of you know, so the governor's office issues these proclamations that prohibit homeowner associations from charging late fees and interest on dues, and that's been done pretty much ever since like March, and it just gets extended, from month to month, and I don't expect to see those extensions probably go away anytime soon. So late fees and interest, in case anyone out in the community, if they're worried if they're falling behind, at least they can have the comfort of knowing that we're not charging them late fees and interest, so their balances aren't going up beyond whatever the dues amount is. I know once in a while someone will call in and they fall behind even a month or two, and then they're worried about the late fees and the interest. And then when we tell them, we're not charging late fees and interest, that immediately makes them feel a lot better. And I believe that's the last slide on that, unless anyone had any questions. I'm sorry this section has to come to an end. I know.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah.
Thank you for keeping it light.
Oh, sure, yeah, no problem.
At this point, we are going to move over to the insurance portion, and I believe Andrew Rutherford from Hub is here. Are you there, Andrew?
I am. I had to unmute myself. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, and we can hear you.
Okay.
Well, when you're ready to move to a different slide, just let us know, and Oryx will change slides for you.
All right. Well, you can go ahead and move this one. Barry is typically the person who would handle this. He is out of town, so I work closely with him. So I will be handling the insurance portion, and I will probably be able to answer most questions anyone has. If not, I will write them down, and Barry will get back to everyone on Monday. So the executive summary is kind of what we're presenting here of your insurance overview. The best way to think of this is kind of think of first party and third party coverages. So we'll start with first party. First party meaning the things that would affect items that you own and control, not necessarily from someone on the outside. We'll get there in a little bit. First and foremost, you have the property coverage, which is including your clubhouse and any of the contents within that facility. There's a limit of a little over $9 million to cover that. I'd like to note that coverage would, if it had a fire, cover to build new facilities with the same, like structure. So being that it's a little older, obviously it'll be a little newer. The reason why I'm pointing that out is if you go down about 3 sections to the building ordinance of law, demolition, increased cost of construction, there's a $500,000 limit. Basically that limit would go with the property limit above, and that would help fund anything that would need to be to get that building up to current building code standards. So say like there's a new electrical code or something of that sort that the building should be built with. Now, if there was a fire, that would cover those increased costs on top of the limit. The next part to note on that is the business income and extra expense coverage, which is the $1,076,000 limit. What that is coverage for if there was a fire or any kind of event that would shut down those facilities that house your golf course and your administrative offices to get up and running again. So if you need a mobile trailer or any kind of loss of income from not having that facility. And that's what the $1 million limit is there. Moving along, and again, jump in if you have questions or tell me to slow down. The inland marine section is again the first party. This is going to be covering your docks. There's $260,000 of coverage for them. It does not cover wind and wave, but it would cover, say, someone docked their boat to it, the boat caught on fire, burnt the dock down. It would cover to replace that dock based on the cost of it today at actual cash value.
Andrew,
The next item
wind and
is
wave. Andrew, what's wind and wave?
so say like there was a giant windstorm and it took out your dock.
Okay.
It would not be covered for that because that's considered basically an act of God or a natural event.
Is there coverage in another area for us for that, or is it we just don't have it?
You do not have that for your docks.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. It's something you could get. It's just very costly. The next part of that is the golf course greens coverage. So you have $200,000 of coverage for the greens itself at the golf course. Again, this would cover an event, say, you know, a teenager took a dirt bike through, tore up the greens, and they need to be replaced. This would provide coverage for direct property damage as well on that, or physical damage. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're moving on to what is considered the third-party coverages. So the first one would be crime, which is pretty straightforward, employee dishonesty coverage. So $500,000 of, say, an employee took funds or performed some other dishonest act. The next portion is the general liability. So this would cover any kind of coverage, say, on a slip and fall or something like that on any of the public roads or public points that people would access, such as the clubhouse or any other the golf course, the facilities like that. You have $1 million occurrence with a $2 million annual aggregate. You also have a $10 million umbrella policy, which we'll get to in a further slide, but that sits on top of those limits. So in reality, you have $11 million in limit for an occurrence or $12 million annually for an aggregate. If you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide. Oh, okay. So continuing third party, so commercial auto for all the vehicles that are operated. There is again, $1 million limit, which also the umbrella sits on top of. So really $11 million limit. This would also provide coverage to if someone was to use their personal vehicle for the associations for them, such as like running to the post office or running an errand to Home Depot or whatever. The liability coverage would extend to them if they were doing that for the association as well with their personal vehicle. That's the hired and non-owned auto liability section on the bottom, but I wanted to bring that to your attention just to make sure everyone understands that if, say someone needed to run an errand, use their vehicle, it could be covered if something was to happen. The liability, not physical damage, but the actual liability itself. The next section is the commercial umbrella. As I mentioned before, this is just another $10 million of limits that sets on top of the other limits that we just discussed. I do want to note it'll go on top of the directors and officers coverage as well, which we will get to in a moment, but you'll see the underlying coverage that's spelled out. It's showing all the lines of coverage, which the $10 million umbrella limits extend over and top of the initial limits. The next section is the pollution liability. This is primarily for the golf course. And this coverage would basically, to give an example, to make it easier to understand, would be if chemicals were sprayed, say on the course or a green, and a child was to lick it for whatever reason and get sick from it, that would provide coverage for that kind of liability. I know that's a pretty bizarre example, but things like that do happen, unfortunately. And then the next section is the directors and officers coverage, which I'm sure you guys are all wondering about. That would protect anyone who's on the board or the board itself. And this would be an example of that would be coverages such as, you know, if someone was to say the board made a wrongful decision or didn't act in accordance of the CCNRs or et cetera, this would be your defense costs, your legal liability for that. That again, the $10 million umbrella extends on top of the $1 million limit. And if you want to go ahead into the next slide. So these are kind of just some examples. I probably touched on most of these as I kind of spoke, but basically it's spelling out who's covered on the director's and office coverage, what it covers. So again, like omissions, breach of duty of employment, errors, things of that sort by the board itself. What we paid, again, damages, settlements, judgments, defense costs. And then what may not be covered is things such as like direct salaries or overhead, which is covered in usually other parts of your insurance. If you want to go on to the next slide. And again, kind of some more definition. Absolutely.
On the umbrella you said cover is just, it's a total coverage of 10 million on all of the policies then?
All of them but the property and basically what I refer to as the first party section. So the property coverage. So it goes on top of your auto, on top of the general liability and on the directors and officers coverage.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically anywhere where a third party would be involved in a claim. And so this is kind of where it's kind of just discussing some more nuances to the coverage and type of policy exclusion. So again, we're still referring to the DNO. So the DNO does not cover bodily injury, physical property damage. That's all covered elsewhere in your general liability. The direction officers is mainly a kind of like, you can look at it as like a legal liability coverage more so than a bodily injury or property damage coverage. I think that's it for my section. If there's any questions,
Andrew,
I'm here.
Andrew, I have a question for you. There's nowhere where it talks about our deductibles in any of this.
Okay. I don't have those offhand, but I can get those for you. And that's not a problem.
Okay.
So I'm making a note.
Andrew, I have a question.
Actually, yes, go ahead. I'm going to see if I can pull up the deductibles real quick, but you can go ahead while I'm doing so.
Okay, you were talking about the auto insurance. We have several groups that go out, like ACC, use their own vehicles now. Are they covered in case of accident or injury or anything?
So you broke up a little bit when you're speaking, but the group, can you tell me more? I mean, are they a direct employee? Are they working on behalf of the board? Explain to me more.
Well, ACC is a group that actually works in conjunction with the board that goes out to individual houses on request that they want to do something to the house, fence, repair or something like that. Would we be covered as far as the auto portion?
So without, it's a twofold answer. The first answer would be does ACC have their own auto coverage? And if so, that would respond first in a claim. If they don't have their own limits, then yours potentially could extend over if you're employing them through a contract.
Okay, we're a volunteer portion of it, so would that disqualify?
So yeah. So yes. So then the quick answer is yes, the liability limit covers over to them.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll get back to you about the deductibles. I'm not pulling it up quickly and I don't want to make everyone wait for me.
That's fine.
But if there's any other questions.
It just would be nice to have the deductible on it. That's all.
No, I completely understand. Agree. You want to know what your portion on the hook for is.
Yep.
Okay, Andrew, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. No problem. Thank you.
At this point, we're going to move on to the legal part. I believe Rich Davis is here. Are you with us, Rich?
Good morning.
Morning.
All right, you want me to go ahead? You had a break at 11:30. Do you want me to go ahead and start, and then we're going to take a break, or just go ahead and proceed through?
I think we might just keep rolling through. What do you think, AJ?
If everyone's good with just rolling through, I mean, obviously, if people are at home, if you got to go to the bathroom or anything, you feel free to do such. I think.
Yeah,
I'm fine with that. Let's get it over with.
Get it over with and get to the Seahawks game, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's been mentioned. All right, Richard, thank you. It's all yours.
How does this work, Brian? How do I advance slides?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, if you just mention when you're ready to move to a different slide, Oryx is here and she'll move the slides for you.
All right, sounds good. Next slide, please. Next slide, Oryx. And we can go on beyond that. So first of all, we're going to talk about legal concepts that affect Sudden Valley and kind of the overall legal structure of Sudden Valley and what laws govern it. So first of all, Sudden Valley is a homeowners association. The statute, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, is RCW 6438. You also are a nonprofit corporation. It was established, Sudden Valley was established as a nonprofit corporation many years ago under 2403, which is the typical way that homeowners associations are set up. Next slide. So in terms of statutes that govern you, you have those two that we just talked about, plus there's a new statute passed in 1998 that's called WCOIA, which stands for the Washington Uniform Common Interest Owners Act. And interestingly, this is a comprehensive act, and anymore, if a condominium is formed, an HOA, a cooperative, they're all governed by this Uniform Act in 6490. When it was being drafted and presented to the legislature, the idea was that every existing association covered by the Condominium Act, the old act, or the new act, or the HOA, everything would be incorporated into WCOIA. And as it turned out, the legislature didn't do that. The legislature gave HOAs and any existing condo associations the right to opt in to WCOIA, but you don't have to. So you continue to be governed by 6438. WCOIA applies to Sudden Valley with one respect, and that is with regards to the process of adopting your budget and then establishing the assessments for the year. It used to be in Sudden Valley that you had a bylaw provision that said that dues can only be increased if there is a supermajority vote of the members. And so the budget was adopted as one vote of the membership, or ratified, and there was a separate vote on assessments. But WCOIA came along and changed that and said that your assessments have to be identified in the budget and they're automatically adopted when the budget is ratified by the membership. In addition to those statutory provisions, you also have common law. So there's court decisions that come down to interpret these particular statutes, and those, to the extent that they are appellate decisions, they govern and are binding on the association. You also have governing documents, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then I'll kind of talk about conflicts on the next slide. So with regards to your governing documents, you have a series of documents. They all have different roles to play. You have a plat map for each of the divisions, and that was recorded with the auditor. Anybody can see it, and it's got just a few provisions that are contained on the plat map. Most of the provisions that govern all the properties are included in the declaration. And what I mean by that is the declaration is kind of like a constitution in a sense, very tough to change. There's a high threshold for amending it. It is recorded with the auditor. Whenever somebody buys a piece of property in Sudden Valley, they get a copy of the declaration, or at least it's referenced in the title report that they get from the title company. So that's kind of the foundational document for the association. It's a contract between the members, And if it's violated, either Sudden Valley as the corporate entity can enforce it or any member can enforce it. Articles of incorporation are just the foundational document for the corporate entity of Sudden Valley Community Association. It's a very brief document. It does list the powers of Sudden Valley. The bylaws are kind of your procedural document. It's how, what are the procedures, the processes by which the board and committees operate. Rules and regulations are those things that govern members' behavior within the association, and there's fines associated with violations of those. And policies are documents that are drafted or approved from time to time by the board to address a particular issue. In terms of hierarchy or priority, I've laid that out in that manner. So in other words, if there was a conflict between the bylaws and the declaration would control. And likewise, if there is a conflict between any of these documents and a statute, well, the statute's going to govern. And that happened with the bylaws just a couple of years ago when WCOYA was passed. As I mentioned, WCOYA now says that that your assessments are immediately adopted with the ratification of the budget. So that essentially wrote out the provision of the bylaws that said that the membership needs to approve them to increase them. Okay, next slide. All right, so now I'll talk a little bit about the board and the proper roles of, first of all, talk about individual directors. Directors are those members in the community who've been elected to the board, and I view them as the leaders of the association, and members view them as the leaders of the association. They look up to the board and the board members for direction, where the association is going to go. They're watching what you're saying. It's an important role. Now it's volunteer, and so the idea for staff and fellow directors is we need to respect your time. You all have different things to do with your life. This isn't your full-time job. You have full-time staff to carry out board policy and board direction, but this is a volunteer thing, and we need to be respectful of the time because everybody has other commitments with their time. Because of that, directors are urged to focus on governance as opposed to management. And I'll talk about that later in the presentation, but that kind of helps you manage your time wisely. When you get down into management, as you must do from time to time, as you know, when a general manager leaves, it takes more time to run the association, as I know you all have experienced. So overall goal of the board is to promote the interests of the association and establish a culture of trust, respect, and dignity amongst the board members. And you can have a very highly effective board by doing that. Next slide. The best boards are those that work together. And in order to do that, you need to be an informed director. So read the governing documents and understand them. The board acts as a whole. Individual board members do not have any authority, all right? So there are occasions where the board delegates authority to a director, usually the president, but it could be somebody else on the board to do something in particular. But other than that, the power rests with the board. As a board, if you meet offline and make decisions outside of the view of the membership, because your meetings are supposed to be open, that really harms the board's effectiveness. Even if only a contingent of the board meets offline and kind of says, here's what we're going, here's the position we're going to take on an issue. That really does kind of create cracks in the board and leads to less efficiency. So I urge members not to do that. Social media debates is another one where I think you have to use discretion in getting involved in social media debates. Sometimes members think that what an individual board member says is more important than what somebody else in the community might say. But again, the board only acts as a whole. So even though a director might have an opinion, everybody's got different opinions. What the board actually says and does is enacted through motions and resolutions. I think that saving your arguments and opinions for the meetings of the board where you can come to a consensus, hopefully, and come to a right decision is the best approach. Okay, next slide, please. A director's standard of care. So this is what you're obligated to do as a director. You have imposed upon you a degree of care and loyalty, which is known as a fiduciary duty. Essentially, this means you're going to act like a reasonable person would in the same circumstance, and you're going to have duties of loyalty to the association. So if you had a conflict of interest at any time, you'd be required to disclose that to the rest of the board and perhaps not take any action, depending on the degree of the conflict. Next slide. In kind of plain English, your standard of care means you act as a reasonably prudent person would. You can retain outside expertise when necessary, like accountants, lawyers, engineers, and the like, and they will possess information that is outside of the layman's usual scope of knowledge. You're entitled to rely upon those experts. Even if those experts are ultimately wrong, you as a board can rely upon those experts and the advice that they give you and avoid liability for breach of a fiduciary duty. It's called the business judgment rule. If you seek outside advice and you rely upon that, you cannot be liable. The last thing to do is understand the issues as they're coming to you for a vote and the risks of either acting or not acting before taking that vote. All right, next slide, please. Board and ACC meetings. So kind of the minimum requirements for a meeting to take place is you have to have a quorum, and there needs to be proper notification given of that meeting. So it has to be properly scheduled according to the bylaws or the ACC policies. Yeah, at every meeting, there has to be minutes that are prepared, and it should be approved then at the next meeting of the board. The board acts formally through two mechanisms. It passes a motion or it passes a resolution. Most of the actions that are taken by the board are in the form of motions. Resolutions tend to be a document that is more formal in nature. It's actually a document that usually starts out with some whereas paragraphs and then sets forth kind of a long-standing policy or something that is more permanent in nature that you're going to want to refer back to from time to time. That's kind of the difference between a motion and a resolution, but both of those are the formal actions of the board. Next slide. Open session. So every meeting of the board is open unless there's an authorized purpose to go into closed session. ACC meetings are also open. ACC meeting, unlike the board, you could have closed sessions with the ACC meetings. Right now, they're not allowed, but you could if the policies were revised and approved. Article 13.8, it says bylaws, but it's really the ACC policies requires all meetings of the ACC to be open at this point. During open session, again, meetings must be kept and discourage meetings that are offline. And I say that, we'll talk about political capital later on. These offline meetings really hurt your political capital. And that's why I kind of emphasize that try and be transparent. Of course, you're going to need to go into closed session from time to time because there are confidential issues that you do not want to have known to the public, or to the membership rather. But those are entirely appropriate. What's not appropriate is to talk about things offline with a majority of the board that should be held at an open board meeting. All right, next slide. Closed sessions. So if you want to have a closed session, you need to do two things. You need to have an affirmative vote in open session so that the membership knows that you're moving to closed session. And secondly, you have to have an authorized purpose for that. We'll talk about what those purposes are in the next slide. But one thing to keep in mind with closed sessions is don't discuss other matters. Once you get back there, it can be tempting sometimes to want to steer into areas that should be discussed in open session. Don't do that. Keep your discussion limited to the authorized purpose. And then the second thing is no motions should be made in closed session. You can have the discussion, you can kind of get close to a consensus, or the discussion just naturally ends. Come back out in open session then and have the vote. What should happen in closed sessions on occasion, will happen frequently probably, is that direction is given. So let's say, for instance, that there's litigation that the association is party to, and I'm part of the closed session. We may discuss kind of the status of things, and then the board will say, here's what we would like you to do, attorney, in this case. Here's the strategy we want you to follow. So direction is given. The same thing will happen frequently with the general manager. He'll bring an issue to your attention regarding personnel issue, perhaps, and seek your direction, and that's what you will give him, but you won't take a vote in closed session. Okay, next slide. So your authorized purposes to have a closed session include personnel issues. You can consult with legal counsel. You can discuss a memo or a letter that legal counsel has issued. You can discuss litigation, or whether it's potential litigation, it hasn't actually happened yet, but maybe is threatened, or actual litigation that's pending. You can discuss violations of the governing documents of the association by individual members. You can also discuss potential association liability that may exist to an owner of the association. Okay, next slide. So closed session, because it's confidential, of course, minutes aren't prepared. That you could take personal notes for your own purposes, but there's no official minutes that are taken for a closed session. This next question is kind of an antiquated one, because now we're all in remote meetings for the time being, but it used to be that we all met in person. And so the question is, well, what if a board member wanted to meet remotely? They can't be at the meeting, they want to join in by telephone. Just like with your regular meetings, a board member can participate by telephone, but it's important to verify that, or it's important to remind board members, I would say, that when you're in closed session, don't have other people in the room. Don't record the closed session. It's confidential. There's no record of the closed session that's supposed to be maintained. Who else can be in a closed session? Well, anybody that could facilitate this discussion can be brought into the session. We've had closed sessions where an investigator has come in to answer questions. Your attorney can be part of that. Individual staff members who might be able to speak to an issue in closed session. You can bring in people as necessary, but that's the board's decision on who to bring in. And then finally, can a board member disclose information received in closed session? The answer to that is a resounding no. You cannot. These are confidential communications, and your board members, your fellow members, expect you to maintain those conversations as confidential. Nothing hurts and drives a wedge between the board as quick as leaks from closed sessions. All right, next slide. Closed sessions, as you know, are confidential, and as I said, just leaks always harm the effectiveness of the board and cause board members not to trust one another. The other thing that it does is it suggests to the membership that the board really isn't operating very well, because if the board were operating the way it should, the membership expects that those conversations are going to remain confidential. The last thing that it does is when leaks occur, it forecloses the possibility of the board speaking to the membership with a clear, unified message. Somebody usurps that opportunity for the board by getting that information out in the community before it's really ready for prime time. Okay, next slide. All right, some best practices regarding interactions with staff and the board. Next slide. As I said before, you're a director of the board, but individually, no authority, unless the board expressly delegates some authority. And that's possible to do. It can be done by motion, could be done by resolution. The president has historically had a delegation of authority to do certain things. And frankly, I don't know if it's written down, but it's just kind of been the practice that the president will create the agenda, will work with staff, the general manager, to decide what issues need to come before the board and certain other things. But unless the authority is delegated, a director doesn't have authority. Next slide. So the chain of command. The board employs the general manager, and it's the general manager's role and responsibility to manage employees. Sometimes it's happened, and I'm not picking on Sudden Valley. I represent a number of associations and governments, and I've seen this kind of thing happen all the time, where a director feels like, well, I'm going to go talk to that employee and direct them to do something that I need done. I need some information, and just go right into the office and start asking questions or directing staff to do things. Circumventing that chain of command is really really harmful to the general manager's ability to manage staff. Because the general manager decides what staff has on their plates, what needs to be done, and then you've got somebody from the outside coming in and kind of interrupting all of that. It isn't good. So it's important to maintain an appropriate chain of command. So if you need something as a director, and you will from time to time not get everything that you need, you want to review something that will help you make a good informed decision. If it hasn't been put into your packet, request it of the chair. The chair can then go to the general manager, and he or she can delegate that on down to staff. All right, next slide. And next slide. As I said before, I think that it's really important for us to respect directors' times. It is amazing that directors, particularly those at Sudden Valley, I know you all spend a significant amount of your own personal time to be a director on the board. It has occurred to me over the years that people who want to run for the board are good people who have good intentions, because they wouldn't do it otherwise. They wouldn't waste all of that time if they didn't. They really have the interests of the association in mind. And so we want to respect their time so that we get good people on the board. The director's role should really remain focused on governance, so that you are looking at the big issues and leaving the implementation of those policies and ideas up to staff. That's why you hire the staff, so that they can do that. All right, next slide, please. So it's going to make you more effective if you focus more on the governance, and the members of the association are expecting the board to tackle those issues. There are big issues affecting Sudden Valley right now. And if I asked, if I went around the table of the directors, I'm sure you could tell me kind of what those are. You know what those issues are. By focusing on governance as opposed to really managing the association and preserving the political bank account, you're allowing staff to do their role, and you're maintaining your proper role. Next slide. So, as a director, what are the do's and don'ts? Well, recognize that you're a leader. You are, and people are in the association look up to you now. A good leader is one that is neither a spectator nor a critic. Try and take an active role on the board. Be prepared. Come to the meetings having read the materials and prepared to discuss. Do no harm. Be careful what you do. You want to leave the place better off than when you came to the board in the first place. As I said, being uninformed is not good, because it really wastes the time of the other board members as you become informed at the board meeting itself. So come to the board informed. If you need more information, it's totally appropriate to ask for that in advance. But when staff is operating, when the process is operating the way it should, staff and the chair should determine what information is needed for the board to make good informed decisions, and we'll get that into the packet ahead of time. And then finally, be accurate in disseminating information. You are the messengers of the association. Make sure that that information is accurate. All right, next slide. Continuing on with some of the things to do, again, leave it in better shape than when you arrived. Govern before you manage. Governance is one of those things that can take some time. You may need several board meetings in order to reach a decision. It could take months actually for certain decisions that are big decisions. That's okay. Usually governance is fine. It can be done in a slow and deliberate manner. Ensure that you set a philosophy, policy, and a culture that is going to be helpful to the association. Culture is worthy of a session all in itself, but it is one of the most important things that a board can do. A board that shows respect to one another, that comes prepared, that has the best interests of the association in mind, and the members can see those things when they come to meetings, that goes a long way toward building your political bank account, toward getting things done at the association, and to also getting good members to serve on the board. All right, next slide. What about the don'ts? Well, don't freelance. You know, it goes without saying that if you don't have any power as an individual board member, it's really not appropriate to freelance and to do things that really are within the province of the board. Meeting
Rich,
off.
can you explain freelancing? I don't understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, so it means we've got a union that has just been formed, and what I see a lot of times with a unionized workforce is that some directors want to go talk to the union members to find out, well, what's bothering you, what kind of things can we do as an association to make your job more satisfying. That's not the role of a director to do that. I know you're curious, why did this union form? I don't know either. I think we're going to find out soon enough, but wait for the process. Don't go out and try and get that information yourself. Okay, we've talked about these other issues, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. One of the things that I think that is very important to realize is the decision of the board, once it's made, is by default the correct decision. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best decision or that everybody's going to agree to it, but staff, your consultants, your attorney, we're all going to follow that decision once it's made. And if it's been done correctly, you've received all the information, you've taken your time, you've reviewed the information, weighed the pros and cons, and you've made a decision. It's not going to be popular in all cases. Sometimes the majority of the membership may even disagree with you. But if you've done your job, you've made the best decision that you can. I think back to, and without trying to be political, but I think back about Mitt Romney when he made that decision to impeach President Trump. He didn't gain any fans. In fact, he gained a lot of enemies. But he reviewed everything, and his speech showed that he thought about that decision. And you as directors are, in the same role. Sometimes you're going to make decisions that just aren't popular. But when that decision has been made, don't go out and badmouth the board about it. Even if you wound up on the losing side of the issue, it's not helpful to go out and criticize the board. That just shows dissension and makes it hard to get along with the other board members. All right, next slide, please. During a meeting, what's the role of a director? Well, it's important to state your views. We want active board members. We need the input of different members who may have different ideas. State them diplomatically. Don't make personal attacks. This is not about any one director. It's about the issues. Look for decisions that are important to you. I've served on boards before, and I know that not every issue is important. And so when an issue is not important, I feel that I don't really have the need to get so involved with it. But then there are other issues I'm very passionate about. So same thing with you folks. Look for those that are important to you. Let people know when you compromise or trust their judgments. This is one way to really gain a lot of credibility and respect with your fellow board members. When you let them know that you compromised or that you trust them, they'll do the same and reciprocate. Respect and support the decision of the board. Once it's done, it's done. It's the board decision and it deserves our respect and support. Recognize that no decision is so important you would allow it to fracture the board. It really isn't, right? So you need to respect the decision once it's been made. All right, next slide, please. The president. So the president governs the meetings of the board and has a very distinct role to play. The role is to promote open and free discussion of all the board members. There are going to be some members who are more reticent and, you know, are not as free with their speech. And it's up to the president to make sure that all members have the ability and opportunity to talk and share their views. He draws out opinions and hopefully seeks consensus. There are going to be votes that are divided, but votes are always more satisfying when there's a consensus. And the president has a hard job because, you know, it's the president who may want to do the talking, but also has to make sure that everybody else has that opportunity as well. Conflict. So as I've said, you know, it is good to have a healthy debate and disagreement about issues. All of that's fine. What's not fine is personal conflict. Don't make it personal. All right, next slide. So the president is also the principal contact between management and the board. That means that he has regular meetings with the general manager. If an issue comes up, the general manager feels like needs to come to the board, the president and the general manager talks. They set the agenda and the president decides, is there a decision to be made, or is this something we just need to bring to the board for information? Does it need to be in closed session? All of those things are kind of the role of the president. Next slide, please. The manager. Okay, so the manager is your top paid employee and the person that is going to mostly interface with the board. The manager has the role to manage all other employees that are subordinate and is your primary interface with the outside, with consultants, with government and all other and vendors and suppliers and that kind of thing. Your manager is going to be your primary source of information. And for that reason, one of the most important characteristics of a manager is to be an honest broker of information. You want your manager to tell you the truth, whether it's good, bad, indifferent. There are going to be things that are, you know, the general manager is going to have to information that is not good. Maybe he messed up, maybe staff messed up. Found some problems. You know, there's good news and bad news, but you want the manager to be honest. The other characteristic in a manager that's important is the manager is going to have his or her own opinions, but the manager gets an opportunity to state their opinion, and then if the board may disagree with that, right? You want the manager to have a thick skin and to be able to march off smartly after that decision has been made by the board. Next slide. The manager, if they're doing a good job, will support the board's decisions. You don't want them out undercutting the board or complaining to members in the community, the board made the wrong decision. That's not a good characteristic for a manager. The manager will support the culture of the board and will implement your budget as you have adopted it. The manager will interface with members and ensure that their needs and questions are met, and will advise the board of concerns that are being raised by the membership. That should happen regularly in the membership report. The manager won't speak out of school. So in other words, the manager will follow the directions that the board has given in meetings. All right, next slide. So distinguishing the two, governing and managing. The directors are thinking about longer term, larger issues, policy issues. Whereas the manager is going to implement those things that the board that the board passes. The manager is thinking more on a day-to-day basis and will have to be a lot more nimble and flexible in making decisions quickly in order to keep the operation going. The directors need to provide the overall direction, and the manager is seeking that direction and feedback. There's a tension there. The manager wants to, know exactly what the board's decisions are so that he can do a good job of implementing that. Keep in mind that you'll sometimes have discussions, usually in closed sessions, is where I see this occur, where there's kind of a consensus, but not a clear consensus. And you're trying to give direction to the manager to do something. The manager needs clear direction, and sometimes it's not that clear. I can't tell you the number of times after a meeting, the next day I'll get a call from, could be a fire chief, could be an executive director, or but somebody who's been in the same meeting as me, and they said, "Did you understand what the board said? Where are we going with this?" It was unclear, right? And what you need to try and do when you can is make sure the manager has good, clear direction. All right, next slide. Strategies for good governance. Think about long-term issues. Articulate a vision of where you want to be and the goals you want to accomplish in the near future and longer term. And one way to do that is at a meeting of, I like to say each year at the first meeting, but it could be a different meeting. Pick a meeting in which you're going to list your priorities that, if accomplished during that year, would make it a successful year. So that at the end of the year, you can revisit that and say, what we accomplished, what didn't we accomplish, and look at your successes. Establish a strategic plan and modify that from time to time, because that's your roadmap for reaching your vision. Your budget. Your budget is an important governance management tool. You want to focus your management efforts here on the budget. We'll talk about that next. Let's go to the next slide. Budget-based governance. So I view this as kind of one of the most important things that the board does, and this probably takes a fair amount of your time as the board, is creating a budget, because this is where you get to see all of your priorities or all of your options at one time, and you make priorities based on those in reference. What are we going to focus on this year, and where do we want our money to go? We only have a limited amount. We need to set our priorities. That's your one time to do that in perspective. All right, next slide. So by having budget-based governance, you preserve your time during the balance of the year, because you focused your efforts there and said, here's what we want to do. So presumably, you don't want to have any second bites at the apple when a decision comes forward. If it's been in the budget, it's presumed valid unless there's a good reason to now take it out. And things do change. Keep in mind, a budget is just a planning tool. Who would have thought when you passed your budget in 2019, for instance, that you would have a year of COVID in 2020 and things would go haywire? You couldn't have anticipated that. So you've got to be nimble, but assuming nothing like that occurs, you've made your decision, try and stick with that. So if something is out of the budget, you need a pretty good explanation for now making that expenditure. Okay, next slide. And finally, the big topic that I think is important for you to always keep in the back of your mind as you're serving on the board is political capital. Political capital is kind of the positive trust and confidence that members give to the board. It's the benefit of the doubt, so that when you come to them looking for approval of a special assessment that may be a difficult thing to bring to the membership, they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. You did the best you could. We believe you. We believe that the money's needed. We're going to approve that measure. How do you put deposits into that bank account? Well, good governance. Members who watch the meetings are going to see if a meeting is run well. Do members respect each other? Are they focused on the issues and not personalities? Does the board have a good culture, in other words? Is there appropriate outreach and transparency by the board? Or On the other hand, is the board making a lot of decisions behind closed doors or offline? If so, then that's not going to deposit anything into your political bank account. Next slide, please. How can you have a forfeiture from that account? Well, making bad decisions. That's not the same thing as an unpopular decision. It's just like an uninformed decision that wasn't well made. Poorly run meetings, abusing the opportunity to go into closed sessions or otherwise making decisions offline, freelancing on social media and elsewhere, breaching confidentiality. Those kinds of things are just not good for your political bank account. But if you've got if you put a lot of capital into that account, you can make withdrawals from it. And how do you do that? Well, again, members trust the board that they're making the right decision, that they're using their money appropriately. When you come to them for a request to support an action, you'll get the membership support. And that's the concept that I want to leave you with here today. And I know I've rushed through that, but I tried to stay within my time limit that you gave me, and I'm happy to take questions.
Hey, Joel?
Oh, did you call me?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah.
Cool. Richard, so you had mentioned about the value of our time and everything. So one thing that I've been kind of trying to figure out is with the at least 3 members of the board being replaced annually and closed session information being confidential and we can't share it and pass it on. Just thinking in the last like 2 months, that's a lot of human capital or information that is leaving every year. How does somebody coming in understand why decisions were made a year ago or 2 years ago? How do we understand well enough to not make either mistakes that other people avoided or avoid making mistakes that were made, in your opinion?
Good question. So with regards to decisions that were made in the past, you can always refer back to the minutes, but you can't always tell why a decision was made. But there are enough people on the board that are continuing that, you know, usually there's enough institutional knowledge there to be able to tell those incoming board members why certain things were made. I know the best example of that is Linda, who I rely upon all the time for why decisions were made 20 years ago. I mean, she has a memory like a steel trap and doesn't forget anything from what I can tell. So there you go. Don't lose Linda. But no, but seriously, people that have served on the board before are going to be your sources of information for that. You have a repository of meetings now. I suppose, are all these meetings being recorded? All of these Zoom meetings that you're doing now? They are. So you can always refer back to them. You know, one thing I would say is, though, Joel, you know, I think your minutes used to be a lot more detailed than they are now. Linda can probably tell me, right? They used to have a lot more discussion, a lot more of the discussion put into the minutes, not just the motion itself, but the discussion. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think during, I want to say during GM Waterman, we went to a standard form that is used by staff to fill out that basically just deals with the motions, because we were told don't write a whole book about, just all we need is what has to deals with a motion that was done by the board.
Yeah. And so there are different theories on that, and each board gets to make their own decision on how detailed you want the minutes to be. But one of the problems with having detailed minutes and saying what every director, summarizing what every director said, is that that can then be used as a sword later on. Well, you said this, you know, I've seen boards kind of get divided over that. And so my preference has been, my recommendation is to keep them slimmer and to just deal with what we really care about is what are the official actions of the board. That doesn't help a person like you, Joel, then who wants to know, well, why did the board make that action? Why did the board do that? That's where you have to rely upon other members who were part of that to give you kind of the background.
So as far as the confidentiality of closed meetings, though, if there was a decision made based on something to do with a staff member, some situation that occurred, and it was discussed in closed session before we came into it, and then I ask, why was this decision made? Is that something that can't be shared later on, or?
No, you're a board member now. You get to know it was confidential. That information that's discussed in closed session is confidential for the board.
Okay, that's what I really wanted to know.
Yeah, as the board changes, you are entitled to that information.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Kim?
Hi, thanks for being here, Rich. I am curious about why on our agenda today, and you may not be able to answer this, but the portion of employee and volunteer harassment, it looks like it's not in our agenda. And I wanted to know why we're not discussing that, because I think it's really important in this political climate to discuss that and for volunteers to have an understanding around what their rights are, and also the fact that I have been the recipient of online harassment. So I think it's important. It should be an important part of the discussion today. Are we going to discuss that at all as a group or not? And why not, if we're not going to do that?
I don't have an answer for that. I was asked to give my normal presentation, which I modified a bit from last year. But harassment is almost a topic to itself. So you could you could do it with your orientation, you could do it at a different time, and it really ought to be done with your staff annually. I will say that, and I think it's a good idea for the board to be part of that.
So my question is to powers that be here, are we going to be doing that? And if so, when? I feel like I should have been a part of this conversation with all the other things outlined, but it's very important, not just because of something I've experienced recently, but for everyone to know where the line is, what the process is, and how protected we are against harassment in this climate of folks being pretty extreme in their behaviors about how people make decisions and what's done on the board.
I will, last year we did have like a section on harassment. And so I'll just say that I probably dropped the ball on that a little bit. But I do think it's important. I agree with Richard. It's definitely something that, should be done yearly. And, maybe it should be something that we need to set up, like Richard said, with the board and staff. But yeah, I thought we would be getting into it and a little bit as well, and I missed that.
Thanks for your honesty on that. Is everyone here that's on the board in agreement with moving forward with some sort of separate meeting to talk about volunteer harassment? By show of hands, I see one nod, two nods. So most of us are. So I don't know if we're making any decisions, but I would like to request that. I think it's very important.
We'll make it happen, Kim.
Thanks.
Is that it for questions for Rich? Rich, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your time. That was very helpful. Greatly appreciated. Before I move on to Ann, Joel had a point of clarification regarding a question that he was asked, and he is asked to kind of jump in and respond. Joel, are you there? I'm not sorry, Joel Heverling. Sorry. Joel, are you there?
I don't see him unless he's on someone else's.
He's on Rachel's. He's supposed to be on Rachel's.
He's on Rachel.
He just popped in and said he wanted to pop on. Joel? Joel
Can you
Heberling?
hear me?
Oh, right, there we go, yeah.
I got it.
I didn't realize it's gonna be that fast. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify real quick, because then I got to thinking afterwards when I got off, that the density reduction for property taxes, I just don't want you worrying that we're cutting like $20,000 checks out of that fund to pay for common area. That's only property taxes that relate to lots that we acquire, with the intent to like turn them into green space for reduction purposes. That's it. And that's why you see such little movement on there, because we really don't have anything going on with that. So I just wanted to clarify that point.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we're gonna, next up on our agenda is procedures and rules of order with our parliamentarian Ann McCartney. Are you there, Ann?
Yes, I am. And I think I've unmuted it, right?
Yep, you're good.
Great. Well, you have to, here, we're going to talk about procedures and rules of order, but first I have to tell you why I came and listened to the whole thing today instead of just coming in. I've been without a computer since Tuesday. My operating system crashed. So I had to come in early and work on the PowerPoint to make the changes. And so I appreciated you letting me sit there during this whole time. Okay, I'm going to cover a number of things, and you will discover that Rich and I have very many things in common that we talk about because procedures and laws are related. So I've got 5 questions that I want to address today. And the first one is the next slide. How is the Sudden Valley Community Association governing system set up? Where do the procedures and rules come from? What's the purpose of those procedures? How are those procedures managed? And what are the basic procedures used? And this means that I'm going to not cover these in depth. You may discover that you might want some more information on some of these things that I can give you at another time. So, next slide.
Let's see if I can get it to work properly.
Okay, she's having trouble.
I've been giving problems today.
Okay. So the SVCA governing system is set up as a representative democracy with powers divided between the members and the board. And I want to talk a little bit about that. The way they're divided up is in the bylaws. And the board of directors are selected by the members, and the board of directors are charged with doing all the, managing all the affairs of the, excuse me, of the association. It would be helpful if you had your bylaws handy, if you had that handout that was in my part of the packet on some words about parliamentary procedure and the grid of the members and motion chart that's part of it. So I want to read you from your bylaws, and this is rights of the board, section 3, Roman numeral 3, C is it's on page 10 of the copy of the bylaws that I have. Okay, section 16, not 10, 16. The board shall be responsible for the affairs of the association and shall have all the powers necessary and convenient to conduct the affairs of the association as provided, may do all acts and things except for those that are reserved for the members by the Articles of Incorporation, these bylaws, and the laws of the state of Washington. So now we want to go look at section 2, Roman numeral 2, section 7, voting. B, at a duly constituted annual or special general meetings, each member in good standing may vote for candidates for the board, candidates for the Nominations and Elections Committee, and the Architectural Control Committee, and any other issues determined by the board. Any formal decision is made by all of you. You are representatives in the same way we elect representatives, and you are not delegates. The difference between delegates and representatives is delegates have a constituency, a specific sub-constituency within the whole body. You are elected as a representative, and you are the representative for the whole association. And that's where some of his comments about that you have no power as an individual, you have responsibility as a board, and your decisions are, once made, are decisions of the entire board, whether or not you agreed to them. And that's in the state law and a couple of other places. Okay, so the other way you have this operating system is you can get consultants, and your two main consultants you seem to end up consulting a lot are your lawyer and your parliamentarian. And your lawyer is hired and I'm appointed, and it's in the bylaws that you have a parliamentarian that does not live in the Sun Valley. So that I'm a trained parliamentarian, and I'm the parliamentarian of the board and of the president. But I need to give you a little bit about how I work. I am a consultant. I give advice. I do not tell you what you have to do. You and your president makes the decision of what advice to take. And the board, if they don't like that decision, can appeal it. So ultimately, the board is responsible for taking advice from me as a consultant, but I can't control you doing anything. Okay. I wanted you to know a little bit about some of the things you get with me. I'm not just an expert on Robert's Rules of Orders. I'm an expert on parliamentary law. And that includes a variety of parliamentary authorities, as well as knowing about bylaws, about minutes. And excuse me. You do know that there's a new Robert's Rules of Order 12th edition. It came out in September. And I just want to make a distinction for you. You also have, how many of you got your copies of the Robert's Rules in brief? Okay, if you haven't, be sure you get one. And this is a very valuable document. It's not much different from the second edition, except for how it refers to this book, which is meant to be a resource book. And it's big because they try to cover the parliamentary thinking on any possible thing that can happen. And that's why they have to come out with new editions. And if you look at the back of this new edition, the most important thing it has is suggested rules for virtual meetings, because we've changed things on how we work together, particularly with COVID. And so the changes that are in here, they give you the changes at the beginning. I heard went to a workshop with the authors talking about the changes. And they gave us a lot more than is in the front of the book. And I can get some information to you on that sometime. But the changes for your actual work are not really that much different. The system for referring to this document is much different. Instead of giving you a page number and line numbers, they give you a section number and then the paragraph under that section. And that's what's really all that has changed in this book from this book. Okay, you have any questions about that change in the addition? Anybody? Okay. So where did the procedures come from? Let's go to the next one. Okay, and to the next one. Let's see what's
I have
going
no idea how it got like that.
on. Okay. You heard this from your attorney, from Rich. And he started with the plat map and the CC&Rs. Well, the main ones are where the procedural rules are found are in the revised Code of Washington. For example, the way that you vote on the budget is a procedure. So that's as much my area of expertise as what's just in Robert's Rules of Order. The Articles of Incorporation have some procedures in it. It's like the number of board members or something. Again, I couldn't access my computer, so I couldn't go back and read the Articles of Incorporation. The bylaws give the basic procedures, as well as they're more than procedures. They are the basic main characteristics of how the organization works. You also can pass special rules of order for how you handle things. And the two things that Rich left out were your adopted parliamentary authority is one of your documents of authority, as well as custom. This is a priority list, and I used to use the phrase, the ones above trump the ones below. I haven't been using that in the last 4 years. What it says is there is a hierarchy of rules. If the one above contradicts the one below, the one above rules. And that particularly matters for custom. If you have a custom of doing things and it's not in any of those authorities, you can use it as long as nobody says, I don't like that, it's not in the rules. And if it's not in the rules, what happens is that custom falls to the ground and you have to go back to what the authority says, what the authorities say. Okay, next one. So I've already said this, next one. Okay, what are the purpose of these procedures? The purpose of these procedures are to get the business of your association done efficiently, effectively, with all persons involved, rights protected, with the civility that honors and respects each other member. That's the only reason for these procedures. And I think we've had a week in which I've looked at procedures in Congress. And I found it fascinating to look at how they structured things like, was anybody watching when they called the recess? Okay, I'm going to talk in a few minutes about who runs these rules, and who it is the president. And the president of the Senate, Pence, called for a recess and said it to recessed until the call of the chair. Nobody questioned it. The speaker in the middle of his remarks stopped and everything stopped because they follow the rules and they know those rules are there for a purpose. And I immediately said to my husband, something has happened that's a big deal, before they even talked about it. That's what procedures are there to do. And if the other thing I noticed about those procedures were they carefully chose what they said. They had a limited time to speak. You don't always have limited times to speak in your meetings, but to make sure that their point was made instead of getting lost in details that were not as necessary or in repetitions that were not as necessary. when they had figured out who was going to speak on the motion, what they did was tell each of the ones who was going to be recognized what area of the particular group that was working with that particular side, what you should emphasize in your remarks. So there was not repetition. New information came out in each remark that came from a different senator. So that's the purpose of the procedures. And they really are designed to make that happen fairly easy. And people think Roberts is a confusing parliamentary authority, but it really isn't. And the things that will help the most is the ability of the chair to know how to follow those rules to keep you knowing what's happening. And I don't know what I was going to say there. Anyway, so next slide. How are these procedures managed? Okay, the responsibility for managing the procedures has been given by the board to the president. Not a sergeant at arms, but to the president. And that's why in a large meeting, the president doesn't participate on content because there's so much to be doing and other people will be able to say what he or she wanted to say. And so they stay back and stay impartial. On a board, AJ, you are as much a representative of the community as any other board member, and so your voice should be heard. But you have that added responsibility of trying to manage the procedures. And I wanted to read you something from this handout on some words about procedures on page 2, in which the role of the presiding officer. The presiding officer is the servant of the assembly gathered in a meeting. His or her job is to help the meeting reach the decisions it needs to make in a manner that is efficient, yet allows all to be heard, all to be respected. While the ultimate authority for the decisions remains in the assembly, the board grants to the chair the authority to make procedural decisions during the assembly so that the delegates can, not delegates, the members can participate and concentrate on the business at hand. Some of these words in here would have been cleaned up before you got it if I'd had my computer available. I also work with conventions. Okay, so AJ, this is what you're supposed to be doing. Move in and out of more formal procedures as the need arises. And the need arises when things get disruptive, people are talking over each other, people are being uncivil, then you have to move into more formal in your board procedures, like move from just letting people talk without having you say so-and-so is next. So you move in and out. If the board doesn't like how you're moving it out, they can appeal how you're doing it. So we're trying to give you all on the board that the time to do the work and that he takes the responsibility for managing. Okay, restate any motions made. And that in parliamentary law is the actual putting on the floor of the item or the motion for discussion until the chair states it, or in what case you may ask the secretary to restate it. It's not on the floor. And once it's on the floor, it is no longer the property of the maker of the motion. It belongs to the assembly. And the maker can't withdraw it without permission of the assembly. So, okay, keep the assembly informed about what's happening. And that's why it's important that you state the motion both to get it on the floor and when you go to the vote. We're voting on the motion to do whatever. Okay, Prevent the violation of the principles of parliamentary procedure, which is protection of rights. Protect the members from unfair treatment or abuse. If someone is being abused, if they are being labeled or somehow harassed in the meeting, the chair says the members will come to order. Recognize members when you're recognizing them and alternate in, recognize them impartially and alternate between those for and against. And here's a really important thing in a meeting. When people start repeating themselves, the chair can say something like, it sounds like we're getting a lot of repetitious argument. I'm wondering if I would like to request that we hold our comments to new information that will help us in this decision. And then you don't get people repeating. The chair has a right to make motions, to speak, and to vote. Lots of bylaws say the chair can't vote except when there's a tie. I think it's much better in a board like you have that the chair has the right to vote, because that chair is the representative of the assembly. Okay. Unlike at your annual meeting, the chair doesn't vote, and except we want, particularly on procedural issues. Okay, give each member the opportunity to speak while preserving proper conduct and decorum. Explain complex motions. Prevent members from using parliamentary procedure as a distraction or a manipulation. Do you know how when you take a voice vote, someone can call for division and you have to take the vote with hands raised? I was once acting as the presider at an annual meeting. And this one very small group, like 3 or 4 people of 100, would always say, a call for division, which is you have to take the vote another way after it's been done by voice. And the third time they did that, when it was clear that everybody but that 5 wanted to go into division, I'd said, calling for division at this point is dilatory. It is being used to keep the business from going forward. It is out of order. And they appealed it and the group voted them down. So they had to move on. So that's what it means when it says prevent from using parliamentary procedure as a distraction. Use unanimous consent. How good are you getting at unanimous consent, AJ?
I'm not, I guess, I don't know.
Well, just in case
We use a consent agenda for our meeting minutes usually.
Okay, but that's not it. What you usually, anytime something comes up that you're sure everybody agrees with, all you have to say, that someone says, I want to make a motion to amend this by such and such, and the whole room says, yay! So you say, is there any objection to adopting this amendment? If there's none, it's done. You don't have to go through. You then say, hearing no objection, it is adopted. And it's a way to quickly get through things. Like after the minutes are corrected, if there's no more corrections, don't make a motion to pass the minutes and have somebody make a motion in a second, but instead just say, the motion is adopted with the corrections made. And you're done. When you get to adjourn and all the business has been done and nobody wants to say anything else, you don't ask for a motion. You say, the business having been completed, the motion is adjourned. And of course, anybody can say, I object, we want to go on. And then you have to go on. But it's a way to get through things that everybody's agreeing with. Okay, and then the most important thing, make the necessary rulings that you need to make on parliamentary procedures or parliamentary law, like protecting civility and so on. Okay. That make you nervous, AJ, for having so much to do? Probably not. You can learn to do it if you don't already know.
Feeling all right.
I've been hearing some good things about your presiding. And I've watched some of the stuff, but I haven't lately. Okay, next. What? How are the basic procedures used? Well, your primary tool is, go to the next one. We're going to go ahead and do that. Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. And the best thing that you can do as a member is read this entire book. That's not the right one. That's the old one. There's the right one. As they say at the beginning, and I love this. Where did they put it? If you have 30 minutes before the meeting, read chapters 2 to 4. If you have 45 minutes, read chapters 2 through 6. If you have 90 minutes, read chapters 1 through 11, and you'll have the basics as a member. And the references are made in here to the new edition. So you can find the details if you need them. And what you say, what the book says at the beginning is the next slide. The rules contained in the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, shall govern the society in all cases to which they are applicable, and in which they are not inconsistent with the law, these bylaws, and any special rules of order. Okay, next. I think that's the one I should take out. I doubled it. Getting the business done. What you're basically doing is making a motion, seconding it, having debate and discussion, and voting. I don't know how many times I've gone to meetings where they say, well, we're going to use parliamentary procedure and here's all you need. Next slide. And they give you something like this. And you look at it and say, huh? I mean, even I say, huh? And it took me a while to learn all this stuff and why this is here. I want to give you a way to look at the procedures that you can use to make your decisions that I think is a little simpler to understand. And we're basically going to end up with that diagram of the big, how do I describe it? The colored diagram with the squares on it. So we'll start with that. Next. First thing that happens is somebody makes a made motion. And by the way, made motions and resolutions are basically the same thing according to parliamentary procedure. One is a little more formal, but they really aren't any different. Both of them are passing something. So main motion or resolution. And this is what actually brings the business to the assembly. Somebody makes a motion, someone seconds the motion, and the chair states the motion. Now we're ready. And if the chair states the motion and people start discussing before somebody seconds it, it has been seconded. Because all a second means is that at least one other person wants to discuss this issue. And some boards don't even require a second. It's not necessary, and it does not need to be recorded in the minutes. Okay. Then debate. And then the chair, quote, puts is the formal word, and it simply means the chair says, the vote is on the motion to do such and such. All those in favor say aye, all those opposed say no, or raise your hands, or whatever. And then the chair announces the vote and then says, and the next business is, and you go on to the next item on your agenda. However, it doesn't always happen that easily, because sometimes the motion is not quite right. And sometimes it's not right at all, and you use a subsidiary motion to either amend it or to refer it. I refer this to the such and such committee. I move to refer this to the such and such committee. And then you can vote on whether to refer it, or you have your amendments. Sometimes there's even more problems with the original motion. So we go to the next things. And I want you to start at the bottom of this list, not the top. But this is another subsidiary motion which disposes or aids in consideration. A motion can be made to postpone indefinitely. This is how you kill a motion. It does allow debate, and it does need to be voted on. You also could postpone it to another time. I move to postpone this to the next meeting so that we have an opportunity to gather further information. You also can say, I move that we limit the debate to 4 minutes per person, because this is going to be a lot of people are going to make comments and we need to get through this. Or you could say, I move the previous question, which means I think we've discussed this long enough, and I'd like us to take a vote to go immediately to voting. The one on the top of this, lay on the table, has been misused and misused and misused. It allows you to put a motion aside, take it from the table, and put it on another table while you deal with something emergent. It is not used to kill a motion. That's because the lay on the table doesn't allow debate and only takes a majority vote, and that violates your rights as a member. It takes away from your members' basic right to have a full discussion and to have anything that takes away rights like voting immediately, a 2/3 vote. So more than half, way more than half, have to agree to do that. So that's how you can deal with the motions themselves. Those are what are called subsidiary motions. And just to give you a clue right now, if you look at the actual document I gave you that shows that original list I showed you about the motions and the list and do they need a second and so on, I've color coded it to match these things. So it's easier to find out whether something needs a second, can have debate, and so on. Okay, next thing. Sometimes there's some procedural questions that have to be dealt with while you're debating this motion. Like, the rules aren't being followed, so you say point of order. The chair rules on something and you don't like the chair's ruling, so you say, I appeal. You don't understand something about this motion, so you make a request for information. And you don't understand what process is being used to do this, and you make a parliamentary inquiry. And all of those can interrupt what's going on, only by board members. Okay, next one. This is another group of what are called incidental, because they're incidental to the motion itself, but we have to deal with them to keep dealing with the motion. You can suspend the rules. You can't suspend the bylaws, but you can suspend parliamentary rules. You can object to consideration. You could divide the question into a couple parts. You can consider it one part by another part. You can call for a decision when the vote's been made, and you can withdraw a motion. Okay, so again, those help you deal with that motion in some way. Then there are things that are absolutely important to be able to do while you're doing this. And these are called privileged motions. Next one. These are urgent, but not related to the motion. fix the time to which to adjourn, and recess. And most of the time it's a motion unless you're chair of the Senate and the people are storming the Capitol. That you don't have to have any motion, you just declare it as chair. I know you've had some rough meetings at your meetings. If it gets dangerous, AJ, you have to recess. And so that can be done without a motion. Otherwise, anybody can make a motion and you vote on whether to recess. And then there's some other privilege motions. And to call for the orders of the day would be, we didn't have to do it this time because we stayed on time with the agenda. But somebody could say, if we'd adopted this agenda, call for the orders of the day. And you have to stop the one you're doing and go to the one that's supposed to be done at that time. And finally, sometimes you get something done and it needs to be reconsidered. So the last one, is it on there? Yeah. So there are motions that bring a question again before the assembly. You can discharge a committee, you can take it from the table, you can reconsider. But most of these, a lot of these you won't use, but this puts into perspective what you need to do. Now, I do want to say one more thing. I realized I skipped this at the beginning. When I was talking about the rights of the members and the rights of the board. The board is the governing body. Just a minute. They make all the decisions. The members only have those rights that are given in the bylaws. They do not speak at any board meetings except where the place they are asked to speak. Or if one of you board members says, I move that, or I ask permission for so-and-so to speak. And then the board votes on it, you can do that. But other than that, the board the members do not make decisions. Some of the things, you just passed a thing that says members can bring petitions to the board for the AGM meeting and vote on them. They can make a petition to the board, but the only things that come to the board meeting or to the annual meeting are those things that you all bring. And even if they vote on them at the annual meeting, they do not take effect until the board votes on them, and the board does not have to follow, but the board can send decisions to the community and say, the AGM, we want you to vote on such and such, and we will pass that decision if you want that. But the power, it's representative, the power stays with the board members. Okay, that's kind of my quick overview. What questions do you have? Nicole or Noel? Unmute yourself.
Well, either.
I thought I pressed the wrong button. I'm the ACC chair, and our entire meetings are motions and whatnot. And when someone makes a motion and we discuss it, but then we decide, oh, we really need to change it, does that person who made the original motion have to rescind?
No. You just make a motion to amend.
Okay.
And you can't say to the chair, or excuse me, to the maker of the motion, will you change your motion to such and such? You can't do that because it's not theirs anymore.
Oh.
It's the board's. And only the board can decide to amend it or to, and that's the, when someone says friendly amendment.
Mm-hmm.
AJ, here's something when you can use unanimous consent. If you look around and it looks like everybody agrees, you say, is there any objection to making this change that so-and-so suggested? And if there is none, you can declare it made. But if anybody on the board doesn't like that, they just say, I object, and then you have to formally vote on it. That's the only way a friendly amendment can be put in. Did that answer you, Noel?
Yes.
Okay, I can't see everybody, so John, will you let me know who raises their hand? Okay. Anybody have questions? Linda?
And I've got a question on, there's a thing on the very bottom of the chart that's about reconsidering a motion. Are there not special rules about reconsideration?
Oh, yes. Reconsideration can only, yeah, and only be done at the meeting that, oh, did you not finish? Go ahead.
No, I'm done. I'm just saying, I wondered if, I think there's special rules that everybody really needs to know about.
And they're described briefly in this one, and they're described in great detail in this one. And they're a little complicated. There's two ways to change your mind about something. One is to reconsider the same meeting, or the next meeting to make a motion to rescind. And sometimes that's really valuable to do. Any other questions? Yes, Noel.
Back to unanimous consent. So like you mentioned, like if we're wanting to approve minutes, then we can go with unanimous consent for that?
That's a vote. That's a form of vote. Unanimous consent is just as much a form of vote as raising your hand or saying aye or nay.
So how would somebody, like you make the motion to approve the minutes and do you need a first?
No, what you need to say is, AJ, in order to, this is for efficiency. If it's clear the changes have been made, you just say, you can even say, if there's no objections, the minutes are approved as corrected.
Okay.
And that means everybody's agreeing. Or at least saying it doesn't matter to me, so I'm not going to disagree. But if anybody, if one person disagrees, you have to take a vote. Again, trying to be efficient, but protecting rights.
Gotcha.
More questions?
Thank you very much, Ann. I think that maybe wraps it up. There's no more questions, I don't think.
Okay, great. And you know, you all know that the staff sometimes, you ask the staff to contact me sometimes with questions, and you sometimes make a motion to have me contacted with questions, and then I try to give you my best recommendation of what I think all the documents of authority are telling you that you can do.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the agenda. Before we adjourn, are there any questions regarding anything that we covered today? Anything that you would like staff to follow up on and get back to you on? Well, if not, thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to all the board of directors members, the NNE members and the ACC members. Also, thank you to the staff for showing up today. And also a big thanks to John for not only this meeting, but for all the meetings that with, I don't know what we would have done without him in this year of Zoom. He's done an amazing job for us. And thank you, John, so much. And Oryx in particular worked really hard on this meeting and getting everything together for this meeting, and was a huge help to a rookie like me. So I don't know what I would have done without Oryx helping me through this process, but thank you to everybody. And to all the participants too. I appreciate your understanding as I kind of move through this, as I kind of muddle through this role of interim GM. I've appreciated all the grace that everyone has showed me. Thank you very much for that.